It is long past midnight at Highgrove House. The hallways are silent. The staff have long since retired to their quarters, and the grand estate is shrouded in darkness, save for a single lamp burning in a cluttered study. Behind the desk sits a man who has spent 70 years waiting for a job he was born to do, yet he has never been idle. He is hunched over a stack of thick, cream-coloured stationery, gripping a fountain pen filled with specific black ink. He writes furiously, his hand cramping as he scrawls page after page in a distinctive, spider-like handwriting that has terrified government ministers, charmed Hollywood celebrities, and deeply unsettled constitutional scholars. These are not merely diary entries or casual notes. They are weapons of influence, cries for help, and unauthorized interventions into the machinery of the state. For decades, the public image of the Prince of Wales, now king, was one of a stiff, awkward man talking to his plants. But the reality, hidden in thousands of private missives sent via royal courier, is far more complex and controversial. These letters reveal a man obsessed with micromanaging the world around him, from the architecture of London skylines to the equipment used by British soldiers in active war zones. They expose a deep emotional reliance on surprising confidants, including a controversial American First Lady and a disgraced television personality whose true nature would only be revealed years later. They show a father who struggles to speak face-to-face with his own sons, preferring to leave handwritten notes on their pillows rather than engage in confrontation. This is the story of the Black Spider Memos and the thousands of personal letters that define the true character of King Charles III. It is a paper trail that the palace fought a decade-long legal battle to keep hidden from the public eye. Tonight, we open the archives to read the words he never intended for us to see. We are looking past the crown and the ceremony to examine the ink-stained fingers of a man who believes he knows better than the elected officials appointed to run his country. This is the investigation into the secret correspondence of the king. Number 10. The Black Spider Memos. The sheer volume of correspondence that flows from the royal desk is staggering, but one specific collection of letters became the subject of a ferocious 10-year legal battle between the Guardian newspaper and the British government. These are known as the Black Spider Memos, named for Charles's distinctively scrawled handwriting that sprawls across the page like arachnids. For years, rumours circulated that the prince was not merely observing political life, but actively trying to steer it, violating the cardinal rule of constitutional neutrality that governed his mother's reign. When the Supreme Court finally forced the release of these letters in 2015, the contents confirmed that Charles was operating as a persistent, high-level lobbyist with direct access to the highest offices in the land. The letters were not merely polite inquiries. They were detailed, demanding instructions sent to government ministers on topics ranging from the readiness of military helicopters to the protection of the Patagonian toothfish. In one exchange with Prime Minister Tony Blair, Charles challenged the government's policy on agriculture and the badger cull, bypassing the standard democratic channels to push his personal views directly onto the desk of the nation's leader. He wrote to the Health Secretary, the Environment Secretary, and the Minister for Culture, essentially treating the cabinet as his personal secretariat. The release of these documents shattered the illusion of a passive heir, revealing a man who felt it was his divine duty to intervene in the machinery of state whenever he saw fit. What makes the Black Spider Memos so significant is the tone of entitlement that permeates the text. Charles does not ask, he suggests with the weight of the crown behind him. He utilised his unique position to bypass the electorate, pressuring ministers who knew that one day this nagging correspondent would be their sovereign. The letters prove that for decades, while the public voted for policies, the prince was quietly rewriting them in black ink from the solitude of his study, establishing a precedent of interference that haunts his reign today. Number 9. The Jimmy Savile Dossier. Perhaps the most disturbing chapter in the history of the royal correspondence involves the letters exchanged between Charles and the disgraced television personality Jimmy Savile. For decades, Savile was a fixture in British culture, but behind the scenes, he was cultivating a close relationship with the royal family, and Charles in particular. The letters reveal that the future king did not just view Savile as a court jester, but as a serious advisor on public relations and strategy. Charles, struggling with his stiff public image and a disconnect from the modern British youth, turned to Savile for guidance on how to rehabilitate the monarchy's reputation. In one handwritten note from 1987, Charles explicitly asked Savile for help, writing, "Perhaps I am wrong, but you are the bloke who knows what's going on." He sought Savile's advice on his speeches and his visits to health institutions, unaware or willfully ignorant of the predator lurking beneath the tracksuit and the cigar smoke. Savile, in turn, wrote a handbook for the prince on how the royals should manage their media appearances. The intimacy of the correspondence is chilling in hindsight, showing a prince desperate for validation and connection, willing to open the palace gates to a man who would later be exposed as one of the prolific offenders in British history. The relationship went beyond mere professional advice. Charles even asked Savile to help manage the behaviour of his sister-in-law, Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York. The reliance on Savile demonstrates a profound lack of judgment and isolation within the royal household. It suggests a man so cut off from the reality of the streets that he mistook a manipulator for a mentor. This correspondence remains a dark stain on the king's judgment, a permanent record of how easily the monarchy could be seduced by celebrity and charisma, blinding them to the monsters in their midst. Number 8. The Nancy Reagan Confessionals. While the public saw a distant and formal prince, his private letters to Nancy Reagan reveal a man capable of intense emotional vulnerability. The correspondence between the Prince of Wales and the American First Lady spanned decades, beginning in the early 1980s and continuing until her death. In these letters, Charles dropped the royal mask entirely. He wrote to her about the anguish of his failing marriage to Diana, the torment of the media scrutiny, and his deep feelings of loneliness within the crowded palaces. Nancy Reagan became a surrogate mother figure, a safe harbour across the Atlantic where he could unburden himself without fear of leaks or judgment. The letters expose the immense pressure Charles felt to conform to public expectations while his personal life was collapsing. In one particularly poignant exchange, he lamented the Greek tragedy of his public image, describing the torture of having his character assassinated daily in the tabloids. He confided in Nancy about the death of his grandmother, the Queen Mother, writing with a raw grief that rarely surfaced in his official statements. This relationship highlights a recurring theme in Charles's life: his tendency to seek emotional intimacy with older, strong female figures who could provide the validation he felt he never received from his own distant mother. These letters also served as a diplomatic backchannel, cementing the special relationship between the US and UK through personal friendship rather than official policy. However, their primary value lies in the psychological insight they offer. They show a man desperate to be understood, writing long, emotional missives late into the night, seeking comfort from a woman who understood the unique isolation of life on the global stage. The Nancy Reagan letters are the closest we get to reading Charles's personal diary, revealing the beating heart beneath the starch of his uniform. Number 7. The architectural vetoes. King Charles has never been shy about his hatred for modern architecture, famously describing a proposed extension to the National Gallery as a monstrous carbuncle on the face of a much-loved and elegant friend. But his disdain was not limited to public speeches. He waged a secret war against architects and developers through a relentless campaign of private letters. The most controversial intervention occurred regarding the redevelopment of the Chelsea Barracks in London. The site was slated for a modern design by the renowned architect Lord Rogers, a man whose style represented everything Charles despised about the 20th century. Charles bypassed the democratic planning process entirely, writing directly to the Qatari royal family, who owned the site, to urge them to scrap Lord Rogers' design. In his letters, he criticised the glass and steel structures as unsuitable for London, effectively using his royal status to sabotage a commercial project. The intervention worked. The Qataris withdrew the application, Lord Rogers was fired, and the project was redesigned in a more traditional style favoured by the prince. This was not a concerned citizen voicing an opinion. This was the heir to the throne using his diplomatic weight to destroy a private contract. The architectural community was outraged, viewing the letters as a gross abuse of power. Lord Rogers later accused the prince of unconstitutional behaviour, arguing that he had used his position to enforce his personal aesthetic taste on the capital city. These letters prove that Charles views the physical environment of Britain as his personal fiefdom, a place where his artistic preferences should override the decisions of planning committees and democratically elected councils. It demonstrates a belief that his birthright grants him the authority to curate the very skyline of the nation. Number 6. The Alternative Medicine Crusade. For decades, King Charles has been a staunch advocate for alternative medicine, often placing him at odds with the scientific establishment and the medical community. His letters to health secretaries over the years reveal a persistent campaign to integrate homeopathy and other unproven treatments into the National Health Service. He has written passionately about the benefits of herbal remedies, coffee enemas, and spiritual healing, urging ministers to divert taxpayer funding toward these practices despite the lack of clinical evidence supporting their efficacy. In one series of letters, he lobbied for the increased regulation of herbal practitioners, not to restrict them, but to grant them a legitimacy that would allow them to operate alongside doctors. He expressed frustration with the narrow-mindedness of the medical orthodoxy, positioning himself as a champion of ancient wisdom against the cold machinery of modern science. This correspondence caused significant alarm within the government, as ministers were forced to balance their respect for the prince with their duty to public health and evidence-based medicine. The danger of these letters lies in the confusion they create. When the heir to the throne advocates for a treatment, it carries a weight of authority that can mislead the public. Charles's private lobbying for homeopathy, even as the NHS was attempting to phase it out due to ineffectiveness, shows a man who trusts his intuition over peer-reviewed data. It reveals a stubbornness in his character, a refusal to accept scientific consensus when it contradicts his personal philosophy, a trait that makes his secret interventions in health policy particularly contentious. Number 5. The comedy connection. Amidst the heavy political lobbying and emotional outpourings, a surprising subset of Charles's correspondence reveals his deep need for escapism through comedy. He maintained a lifelong correspondence with Spike Milligan, the chaotic genius behind The Goon Show. The letters between the two are surreal, often addressed to nonsensical names and filled with bizarre jokes. Milligan, a man who respected no authority, would famously write to the prince addressing him as "you grovelling little bastard," a salutation that Charles reportedly delighted in. It was a rare space where the royal hierarchy was inverted, and the prince could be treated with irreverence. He also wrote frequently to Dudley Moore and other comic figures, seeking their company and their humour. These letters reveal a man who felt suffocated by the deference and sycophancy of court life. He craved the company of jesters who could puncture the pomposity of his existence. In these notes, we see Charles trying to be funny, trying to keep up with the wits of professional comedians, and using humour as a shield against the depression and melancholy that often plagued him. The comedy letters are essential to understanding his psychology. They show that the man who writes angry letters about architecture and badger culls also possesses a desperate need to laugh at the absurdity of his own position. Spike Milligan was allowed to say things to the future king that would have had anyone else beheaded in a previous century, and Charles loved him for it. It suggests that deep down, the king is aware of the ridiculousness of his role and seeks out those who are brave enough to point it out. Number 4. The dismissal of the Highgrove Four. While Charles can be charming in his correspondence with celebrities, his letters to his staff reveal a ruthless streak that borders on coldness. The king is known for his aversion to face-to-face confrontation, often preferring to handle difficult personnel matters through the written word. This was most famously illustrated in the dismissal of several high-ranking staff members, incidents where loyal service was terminated not with a handshake and a conversation, but with a note. The most notorious incident involved the Highgrove Four, a group of senior advisors who fell victim to internal palace power struggles. Reports from former staff indicate that Charles would leave handwritten instructions or letters of dismissal on desks rather than calling the individual into his office. This management by memo created an atmosphere of paranoia within the royal household. Staff members lived in fear of the dreaded envelope, knowing that their career could be ended with a stroke of the prince's fountain pen. It paints a picture of a man who, despite his global stature, lacks the basic managerial courage to look a man in the eye and fire him. This reliance on letters for discipline suggests a profound emotional detachment from the people who serve him. It allows him to make hard decisions without witnessing the immediate human cost, sanitizing the unpleasantness of leadership. The letters to his staff are not the ramblings of a philosopher prince. They are the cold administrative orders of a CEO who prefers to stay locked in his ivory tower while the executions are carried out by paper proxy. Number 3. The letters to William and Harry. The most heartbreaking collection of letters in the king's archive are those written to his sons, William and Harry. Royal biographers have noted that Charles, much like his own parents, often struggled to communicate affection or discipline verbally. Instead, he would leave letters on their pillows or desks to be found later. In the wake of Princess Diana's death, when the boys were navigating unparalleled grief, Charles often used notes to express the feelings he could not vocalize. It was his way of bridging the emotional chasm that his upbringing had instilled in him. In recent years, as the relationship with Prince Harry deteriorated, the nature of these letters shifted. After the explosive Oprah interview and the publication of Spare, communication between father and son reportedly broke down almost entirely, leaving letters as the only viable medium. Reports suggest that Charles wrote to Harry to express his sorrow and confusion over the public attacks, trying to reason with his son through the same medium he uses to lobby ministers. The tragedy is that while a letter can convey information, it cannot convey the warmth of a hug or the tone of a voice. These letters reveal the generational trauma of the House of Windsor. A father who cannot speak his heart writes it down instead, hoping the ink will carry the love he feels but cannot say. It is a poignant reminder that for all his power and privilege, the king struggles with the most basic element of fatherhood: connection. The letters to his sons are a testament to a love that is real, but tragically constrained by the stiffness of royal protocol and personal inhibition. Number 2. The 27-page rant. Legend within the Irish government speaks of a specific letter, often referred to as the 27-page rant, that Charles sent to the Taoiseach of Ireland during a particularly sensitive period of Anglo-Irish relations. While the exact contents remain heavily guarded, the existence of such a document highlights the sheer scale of Charles's graphomania. He does not send brief notes. He sends manifestos. He writes with a fervour and a lack of editing that suggests a man who cannot stop himself once he begins. This tendency to write exhaustive, multi-page letters on complex subjects shows a man who believes he possesses a unique, almost messianic insight into world affairs. Whether writing to the Irish government, the Chinese leadership, or Middle Eastern royals, Charles operates under the assumption that his perspective is not only valid, but essential. The rant is emblematic of his belief that if he just explains his point of view in enough detail, with enough underlining and exclamation points, the recipient will be forced to agree by the sheer weight of his logic. It also reveals a lack of self-awareness. To send a head of state a 27-page handwritten letter is an act of supreme ego. It assumes the recipient has the time and the inclination to decipher his sprawling thoughts. It is the behavior of a man who has never been told to edit himself, who has been surrounded by courtiers who treat every word he utters as wisdom. This letter stands as the ultimate symbol of his meddling, a relentless, exhausting, and unsolicited lecture delivered from the throne to the world. Number 1. The constitutional crisis. The ultimate significance of Charles's secret letters lies in the constitutional crisis they threaten to trigger now that he is king. For decades, he was the activist prince. But the monarch is required to be a cipher, a blank slate upon which the nation projects its identity. The king has promised to cease his campaigning, stating in his first address that he would no longer have time for the charities and issues he cared so deeply about. However, insiders fear that the black spider habits are hard to break. The transition from the black spider memos to the king's official red box is not just a change of stationery, it is a test of the British Constitution. If Charles continues to write private letters to ministers, even if they are more circumspect, he risks politicising the crown in a way that could be fatal to the monarchy. The fear is that the habit of 50 years, the late-night writing, the secret couriers, the private lobbying, is too deeply ingrained to simply vanish. Every letter he writes now carries the full weight of the state. A suggestion from the prince was annoying. A suggestion from the king is a command. The secret letters are no longer just quirks of a waiting heir. They are potential constitutional landmines. If a letter were to leak today showing the king trying to influence tax policy or healthcare reform, it would spark a crisis that could bring down the government or the monarchy itself. The pen in Charles's hand is now the most dangerous object in the palace. The question remains, can he put the cap back on, or will the ink continue to flow, writing the final chapter of the House of Windsor? King Charles III is a man out of time, a 19th century soul trapped in a 21st century media cycle, trying to solve the world's problems with a fountain pen and premium bond paper. His letters reveal a profound contradiction. A man deeply concerned with the welfare of his nation, yet arrogantly convinced that he alone has the answers. He is a lobbyist, a father, a critic, and a king, all pouring his psyche onto the page in frantic, scrawled ink. These letters are the artifacts of a life lived in a gilded cage, where the only way to reach through the bars was to write a note and hope someone on the outside would read it. But this leaves us with a difficult question about the role of a modern monarch. Do you view these letters as the work of a caring, engaged leader trying to use his platform for good, or are they the dangerous meddling of an unelected figure who refuses to respect the boundaries of democracy? Is it better to have a king who cares too much, or one who doesn't care at all? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the private archives of the royal family, hitting the like button helps us uncover more stories like this. And for more investigations into the hidden history of the British monarchy, make sure you are subscribed. We have a video coming up on the secret financial accounts of the Duchy of Cornwall that you won't want to miss. I'll see you in the next one.